Back in 1991, an 18-year-old girl named Doris Gibson from Elkhorn, Wisconsin was driving to a friend's house on Halloween night along Bray Road, a stretch of country road on the outskirts of town. While she was driving, she felt her car bump up as she ran over something in the road. She pulled over to see what she had just hit. But when Doris got out and examined her car, there was nothing wrong. No blood, no dead animal, nothing. That was when she sensed something moving behind her. She turned and saw something rushing at her out of the darkness. She said it was large and hairy and it stood upright on two legs. This creature, whatever it was, had a body that was more or less human, but had the head of a wolf. Doris did what any of us would do and immediately jumped back in her car and jammed her foot down on the gas. As she peeled away, Doris looked into her rearview mirror. She was horrified to see that the creature was rushing up on the car much faster than she could have imagined. That's when she felt the heavy thud of the creature's weight as it landed on her car's trunk. The story of Doris Gibson is just one of many similar stories that were reported throughout Elkhorn, Wisconsin in the 1980s and 90s. In this episode, I'm going to tell you what happened to Doris, and what happened to other people throughout Wisconsin and northern Michigan when they claimed they were being terrorized by a real-life werewolf. When we talk about monsters, there are probably a few creatures that come to mind immediately. There's the vampire, of course, because everyone loves a good bloodsucker. In more recent years, zombies have shambled their way into the public's imagination. But after all, what's a zombie but a vampire with fewer manners? But if we're talking about the really big monsters, then there's one other name that probably should come to mind. The werewolf. Typically, when we think of werewolves, we think of a person who is cursed to transform into a half-man, half-wolf monster by the light of the full moon. But a lot of what we think we know about werewolves actually comes to us from Hollywood. For example, the parts about becoming a werewolf being transmitted through a bite, and then becoming a monster by the light of the full moon, were first popularized by the 1935 film Werewolf of London. In that film, it's said that the werewolf curse comes from the East, specifically Tibet. This echoes xenophobic fears of East Asian immigrants from the time. It's actually from 1941's The Wolfman where we get some other popular parts of the folklore. One of which is that the method of killing the creature is by shooting it with a silver bullet. Yet another detail that comes to us from that movie is that the person who receives the werewolf curse is marked with a pentagram. The movie was written by a Jewish screenwriter named Kurt Siodmak, and it's believed this particular detail was added as a way of shining a light on the growing Nazi threat in Germany. The pentagram is often seen by film scholars as an allegory for the Star of David that Jews were forced to wear by the Nazis. But the legend of the werewolf is one that has been around for a long, long time, before Hollywood ever sunk its claws into it. Many scholars think that the earliest surviving examples of a man transforming into a wolf comes to us from the Epic of Gilgamesh, written around 2100 BC. In that particular story, Ishtar, the goddess of fertility, love, and war, becomes infatuated with the hero Gilgamesh. Only Gilgamesh rejects her advances after he hears how badly Ishtar treated one of her previous suitors, namely, that she turned the guy into a wolf. In the 5th century BC, the Greek historian Herodotus described a nomadic group of people called the Nuri. According to Herodotus, these people would periodically transform into wolves, but that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to werewolf stories from out of Greek mythology. An even more important legend in werewolf lore is that of the cruel king Lycaon of Arcadia. According to this story, Lycaon thought it would be a really great idea to test both Zeus's omnipotence and his culinary palate by cooking his own son Nyctimus and serving him up at a banquet for the king of the gods. But Zeus wasn't the least bit amused by this little test. In fact, he was so disgusted that he transformed Lycaon into a wolf and killed his offspring. Then he brought Nyctimus back to life. Now, if the name Lycaon sounds familiar to you, that may be because the king's name is actually where the term lycanthropy is derived from. And that's not even where the story of Lycaon stops either. Further stories tell of a cult that sprung up in Lycaon's honor. A cult that participated in human sacrifice. This particular cult would mix human meat with animal meat in a special blend that supposedly would cause people to turn into wolves, What's especially interesting about this particular legend is that in 2016, the remains of a teenager were found near an altar to Zeus on Mount Lycaon, where the cult reportedly operated, leading some people to wonder if there may be some kernel of truth to the legend of the werewolf cult. Throughout the early history of werewolf legends, many of these stories claimed that one way to turn into a wolf was by wearing a wolf pelt. Both the ancient Greeks and the Romans had stories about men turning into wolves by wearing pelts. And this is something that even carried over elsewhere throughout Europe. In Norse mythology, there's the saga of the Volsungs, a late 13th century Icelandic tale of a father and son who come across a house inside of which they find a couple of sleeping men with wolf pelts hanging above their beds. The father and son steal the pelts and put them on, only to realize they have just made a terrible mistake. You see, the pelts came with a curse that caused them to transform into bloodthirsty wolves, roaming the countryside and eating people. At one point, the father and son turned on each other. The father mortally wounded his own son. Luckily, a magic raven was flying by and witnessed what happened. The raven gave the father a leaf which healed his son's wounds. Soon after, the two men were able to strip off the cursed skins and burn them in a fire, ridding themselves of the curse forever. In some ways, it's understandable why ancient Europeans would be so fearful of werewolves. Wolves were a widespread predator across Europe. It was common for livestock to get picked off by packs of hungry wolves, and it wasn't uncommon either for people to be attacked as well. As time went on, though, many of these attacks weren't just getting blamed on actual wolves, but on people accused of being werewolves. In 16th century Germany, a man named Peter Stump, or Peter Stube, confessed to being a werewolf and partaking in witchcraft. He claimed that a magical belt had been given to him by the devil that allowed him to transform into a wolf. After Stube was arrested, he confessed to killing over a dozen people, including 2 pregnant women, their babies, as well as his own son. Now, it's possible that Stube really was a horrific serial killer. But keep in mind that after his arrest, he was tortured horribly. He was placed upon a wheel and had his skin flayed off with red-hot pincers. His limbs were broken, and he was eventually beheaded. The man probably would have confessed to pretty much anything long before then. Throughout history, you can find plenty of other stories like Stube's, of people accused of being werewolves. Much like the witch trials that occurred throughout the Middle Ages, werewolf trials were common throughout Europe. Whereas we can certainly write off most of these stories as the result of superstitious paranoia from centuries ago, what's much less common are werewolf stories in the modern era. But during the late 1980s all the way up to today, numerous reports from credible witnesses have been made claiming that something terrifying is stalking the countryside throughout Wisconsin and northern Michigan. Something with the body of a man, but the head of a wolf. In Jefferson, Wisconsin, there's an institution called the St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children, which is a much more polite-sounding title than its original name, the St. Coletta School for Backward Youth. This was a home for developmentally challenged individuals. The place opened its doors back in 1904 inside a former Franciscan convent, and it changed to the much more polite-sounding title in 1931. The most famous patient to ever live at the Institute was almost certainly Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of President John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy. Rosemary Kennedy was born with a mental deficiency after complications during birth left her brain oxygen deprived for an extended period. Throughout her youth, Rosemary struggled with cognitive issues and seizures. When she was 23, her family forced her to undergo what turned out to be a botched lobotomy that left her permanently disabled. The sprawling campus for the Coletta School took up more than 175 acres, some of which was actually built on top of some ancient Native American burial grounds. During the mid-1930s, the night watchman for the facility was a man named Mark Shackman. It was his job to walk the grounds at night and keep an eye open for signs of trouble. Most nights, Shackleman's job was pretty easy. Jefferson was a pretty sleepy little town and not much exciting happened there. One night, though, in 1936, things took a dramatic turn. Shackleman was going about his usual duties, which led him to an area near the Indian burial mounds. After he crossed a field, he spotted a strange shadow at the base of one of the mounds. At first, it was difficult to make out exactly what he was looking at in the dim light. It was a shadowy figure, hunched over on all fours, and it appeared to be digging. Shackleman quickly realized the figure was too big to be a dog or a wolf. He assumed it was a local teenager causing some mischief. But then, when the night watchman shone his flashlight on the figure, that's when he realized this wasn't a man at all. It was some sort of monster. Shackman later said that the creature appeared to be about the size of a really large, muscular human. But what was especially shocking was that it was covered in thick, dark fur, and it had a shaggy canine face. What was even worse was when the creature stood up to its full height on 2 legs. Shackman felt as if his heart was going to beat its way out of his chest. He had trouble catching his breath. He could smell a foul stench in the air like rotting meat. He didn't have a lot of time to study the creature because it growled at him, then turned and ran off into the nearby trees. The following day, Shackman returned to where he'd seen the creature just to make sure he hadn't been imagining things. When he got to the burial mound, he found signs of digging, but not just digging. It looked like whatever had done it had used large, sharp claws to dig huge gouges into the earth. Now, Mark Shackman must have been a pretty brave individual. That's because that night he went back looking for the creature, and he found it again, right near the earth mound. Except this time, instead of running away when Shackman shined his flashlight on it, the creature turned and stared straight at the night watchman. But not only did the creature turn and make eye contact, he said that it bared its sharp fangs and actually spoke to him. The creature made a low 3-syllable growl that sounded like the word Gadara. The man and beast locked eyes for a long moment after that. It continued to snarl at him. Shackman was a tough guy. He'd been a heavyweight boxer in his youth, but at that moment he felt weak in the knees. Shackman braced himself for an attack. But the creature turned and slowly walked away. Shackman never saw it again. But the way it had looked at him, and the sound it made stuck with him for the rest of his life. Mark Shackman's story was the earliest reported sighting of what has come to be known as the Beast of Bray Road. Most of the sightings, as well as the road where the creature takes its name from, are situated near the town of Elkhorn, Wisconsin. This is a little town about 30 miles south of Jefferson, the location where Mark Shackman first spotted the creature back in 1936. Elkhorn is a small town of about 10,000 people. Most of the modern sightings of the creature occurred along a stretch of country road named Bray Road. Although the original sighting of the beast dates back to 1936, the creature really didn't come into the spotlight until 1991. That was when Linda Godfrey, a reporter for the Walworth County Week, began reporting on a number of sightings of a monstrous animal being sighted on and around Bray Road. Linda wrote numerous books on the Beast of Bray Road and other wolf-like creatures. After she spoke to dozens of eyewitnesses who all claimed to have seen similar things. One such story is that of Lori Andreezy. She was the manager of one of the local bars in Elkhorn. In the fall of 1989, she had just finished her shift and was driving home at about 1:30 in the morning along Bray Road. The road was quiet and desolate at that hour, which is what made it even more startling when she noticed a large, dog-like creature crouched by the side of the road, ripping apart chunks of what looked like roadkill. Andreezy's car's headlights reflected off the creature's eyes at night. Andreezy said she got a good look at it as she sped by. She said the creature was about the size of an average man, maybe 5'7" and 150 pounds, with the torso of a human, but the head and claws of a wolf. Then there's the story of Doris Gilpin. On Halloween night 1991, Doris said she was actually chased in her car by a large wolf-like creature that landed on her trunk for a minute before falling away. It wasn't even the last time Doris spotted the creature that night. Later on, Doris headed to a friend's house to go to a party. After the party, they were driving back along Bray Road to the girl's house when the friend began pointing out the window and screaming. The creature was standing a distance away from the road, watching them. The following morning, after Doris was finally safe at home, she went outside to examine her car more closely in the daylight. That's when she found a series of long, vicious scratches in the paint on the car trunk. Scratches that appeared to have been made by something with very large, sharp claws. In late December of 1990, an 11-year-old girl named Heather Bowie and her cousins were out sledding near a creek on a clear winter's day. They were on their way home just before dusk when Karen said she and her cousins spotted what they at first thought was a large dog with silvery gray fur standing in a cornfield. That is, until the creature stood up on 2 legs and began running toward them at full tilt. The girls raced back towards their house. They said the creature cleared half the distance toward them before it abruptly turned and disappeared back into the field. Over the years, a number of people began claiming they saw other strange things in the woods around Bray Road as well. One of whom was Scott Bray, the man whose family gave the road its name. He said he found oversized wolf tracks on his family farm. Throughout the area, local animal control officers found mutilated animal remains around Bray Road. Some rumors began to spread throughout town that this was the work of satanic cults, whereas others were convinced that there was some sort of large, vicious animal living in the area. There was even one occasion where an animal control officer named John Fredrickson found the bodies of 5 horses with their throats slashed in a pasture. To date, no one is sure what killed them. In 2018, a man named Danny Morgan managed to snap a photo of what he said was the Beast of Bray Road. The photo is blurry, but it does appear to show some sort of hairy creature walking on its hind legs along the road. In more recent years, the number of sightings of the beast have dwindled. But it's not the only place in the Midwest where large wolf-like creatures have been sighted. Throughout northern Michigan, there have been numerous sightings of a so-called Dogman, a large wolf-like creature that sounds an awful lot like the Beast of Bray Road. The first reported sighting of the Dogman dates back to the year 1887 when a couple lumberjacks spotted the creature in the woods. This creature reportedly stood over 7 feet tall and had the head of a wolf but the body of a man. Its icy blue eyes were some horrific combination of man and wolf, and its echoing howl sounded almost human. In 1938, a man was fishing in the Muskegon River when a pack of wild dogs attacked him. The man was able to scare most of them away by firing a shotgun into the air, all except one that didn't seem to care about the shotgun, and instead it stood up on its hind legs and growled at him. In 1961, a night watchman was working his shift at a manufacturing plant located in a rural area known as the Haymarsh. One of the perks of the job was that the night watchman and his family got to live on the property in a house provided by the company. One night in the summer of 1961, the night watchman was sitting on his porch after dark drinking a cup of coffee. He had a good view of the entire property when something caught his attention. There was something moving near a chain-link fence behind the building. The watchman drew his gun and waited for a minute, but he soon realized whatever was moving around back there wasn't a man, but some sort of large, hairy creature. This creature alternated between walking on all fours and standing up on its hind legs. The night watchman didn't believe what he was seeing, and he didn't think anyone else would either. So he quietly went back inside his house and grabbed his Kodak 35mm camera, and he snapped a photo. The photo is grainy, but it does appear to show something standing near a lamppost. The night watchman said almost immediately after he snapped the photo, the creature ran off. In 1987, DJ Steve Cook of Traverse City recorded a song that told the legend of the Dogman. According to the song, would return to stalk the woods every 10 years, and this just so happened to be the year. Now, Cook meant the song to be a prank, but after the song played on the air, the radio station was flooded with dozens of calls from listeners who claimed to have encountered the creature. In 1993, a teenage girl named Courtney was sneaking a cigarette behind her parents' home near Todd Lake, northeast of Reed City. The sun was setting low on the horizon. Courtney had a clear view of a large abandoned barn on the property next door. That barn had always spooked her. As she stood and watched in that direction, she suddenly became aware that something was moving in the shadows. Then this thing came into clear view. It looked straight at her and stood up. Once again, it was what Courtney could only describe as a werewolf. Now, we can tell anecdote after anecdote about these dogmen, but where it gets really interesting is when we have real photographic evidence of something strange. Besides a couple blurry photos I mentioned previously, there was also another photo taken by a Michigan politician who chose to remain anonymous for political reasons. He snapped a photo of a huge wolf-like footprint, which he took a few minutes after he spotted a gigantic wolf-like creature in the woods at night. He even placed a shotgun shell inside the print for size comparison. And this print is huge. Then there's the Gable film, which some people believe might be the clearest footage of them all. It's a piece of film allegedly found in a box at a junk store that shows what appears to be a typical family playing in the snow. The film appears to have been shot during the 1970s, and in the film the family is playing normally when the photographer pans around and his camera lands on a large creature in the snow. Suddenly, this creature rushes towards the cameraman, who turns and runs and appears to fall down. The last thing on the film is a close-up shot of some large, sharp teeth. So is there really a Dogman or a real Beast of Bray Road? And if so, what is it? Of course, the natural inclination is to wonder if there may be a real live werewolf stalking the Midwest. One thing that sets the sightings of the Beast of Bray Road and the Michigan Dogman apart from other werewolf stories, though, is that no one has ever suggested that these things were human beings transforming into a wolf. The only thing anyone ever reported seeing was a creature with the head of a wolf and the body of a man. In addition to all the werewolf legends, other people have speculated that this may be a creature from Native American folklore. Some people have suggested that the creature might be the Wendigo, another terrifying creature from ancient myths. Other native folklore also speaks of a creature known as a Shunka, a creature that looks like a cross between a wolf and a coyote. Some more down-to-earth explanations include that the creature may simply be a misidentified gray wolf or a large wild dog. And while wolves aren't common in Walworth County, they have been known to live in the area. Another possible explanation is that all this talk of dogmen and werewolves is either a hoax or a case of mass hysteria. It's possible that the more the rumors spread about the Beast of Bray Road, the more people decided to get in on the action and began reporting their own encounters with the creature. Speaking of hoaxes, you know the Gable film I mentioned? Well, that's definitely a hoax. It was the creation of professional actor Mike Agrusa. After he heard the song about the Michigan Dogman, he thought it would be fun to make a short horror film about it. Mike was later interviewed and even showed how he made the monster costume. Now, we can't say for certain if all the other photographs taken are hoaxes as well, but if one person staged such an elaborate hoax, you have to call into question the others as well. But at the same time, it doesn't seem possible that everyone who ever told a story about the Beast of Bray Road or the Michigan Dogman is lying. In 2019, a Travel Channel show called The Legend Hunter came up with a novel explanation claiming that the beast might actually be an American black bear suffering from the mange. Black bears have been sighted in Walworth County, and they can walk on two legs. And if you've ever seen a photograph of a hairless bear, you'll know they're pretty terrifying. Then there are people like Lori Andreezy, who felt certain that the beast was something satanic from the moment she laid eyes on it. As I mentioned, there were some people who suggested that all the mutilated animals found throughout Walworth County were actually animal sacrifices killed by a satanic cult, which has led to further speculation if perhaps this mysterious cult had summoned some sort of demon. And you have to consider if there might be something to this. Do you remember Mark Shackman, the night watchman who first saw the beast back in 1936? He actually kept what he saw to himself for many years until he was nearing his death in the late 1950s. But he remained haunted by what he'd seen, and forever mystified by that single word the beast spoke to him so many years before, Gadara. Eventually, when the man thought the end was near, he broke down and told his son what happened to him. At the time, Mark's son was a reporter for a local newspaper. Mark hoped that by sharing his story, other people would come forward and tell their stories of seeing the creature. Although it didn't seem like this happened, though, at least not until Linda Godfrey got involved in the early 90s. Back in the Middle Ages, it was commonly believed that the causes for people becoming a werewolf was because of demonic possession. It's interesting to note, then, that there's a particular story from the Bible that might have some bearing on the story of the Beast of Bray Road. The book of Mark tells the story of a man who said he was possessed by a demon. When Jesus asked the man the demon's name, he told him his name was Legion. The city where this encounter was said to occur used to be the capital of a Roman province, but it was destroyed by an earthquake back in the 8th century. The interesting thing about this story, though, is the name of that city. It was called Gadara. If you like this video and want to hear even more werewolf folklore, click on the video on the screen to hear all about the horrific monster that some people think may have been a real-life werewolf terrorizing the French countryside.